24th Executive Committee will now come to order. We are convened as of 12:02 p.m. This is Chair Davidson speaking, and I would respectfully ask everyone attending this meeting to please mute yourself unless you are recognized to speak. Please note that the committee meetings of the RTD Board of Directors are being held remotely via Zoom and are audio and video recorded. Meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of the meetings, are posted as soon as practicable to the board's website. During today's meeting, we are also providing Communication Access Real-Time Translation, also known as CART. Anyone who would like to access this service should send an email to the RTD Board Office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com, and a link will be provided. Additionally, the CART transcript can be automatically translated into Spanish for anyone who would like access to a live transcript of the meeting in Spanish. A live stream of this meeting is also accessible via RTD's YouTube page. I would now like to call for the roll for executive committee members. First, Vice Chair Catlin.
Here.
Second, Vice Chair Geisinger.
Here.
Secretary Guzman.
I am here.
Treasurer Bouquet.
It's like you
Perfect timing. I just called Treasurer Bouquet's name. It looks like he's here.
Present. Thank you, sir.
That was impeccable timing. And this is Chair Davidson. I am here. That is 5 committee members present and 0 absent. For the sake of the record, I see that we are also joined by Board Director Sloan. Thank you for joining us, Director Sloan. I'll now open up for public comment to anyone who would like to address the committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda for the current and immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak and have not already done so, you may raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone. During this time, the committee does not offer any direct comments or responses. However, if you would like to be contacted regarding your public comment, you may email the RTD Board Office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. Before reading the rest of the instructions for public comment, I'll now check to see if anyone has raised their hand to speak. I am not seeing any here, but if Board Office Executive Manager Kroll could confirm that there are no hands raised.
Yes, Chair Davidson, this is Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office. There is no one that I see who has arrived and indicated a desire to provide public comment at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. And were there any emailed comments that were received for today's meeting?
Yes, Chair Davidson, Chair Davidson, no, there were not any comments received via email in advance of this meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kroll. With no participants in the queue and no public comments received, we will close the public comment period at this time. We'll now move to recommended actions. There is one recommended action this afternoon. As a reminder for the committee staff and anyone watching and or listening to this meeting, any action items that are passed by the executive committee, even if the vote is unanimous, will be included on the board agenda under recommended actions so that the full board will have an opportunity to discuss the measure presented. The action item considered under the committee now will be for a bylaw amendment to change the name of the Operations and Safety Committee. This is for the Board of Directors to amend Article 6, Committees of the Board, Section 1, Standing Committees, Paragraph E, to change the name of the Operations and Safety Committee to the Operations, Safety, and Security Committee, and for the Board of Directors to amend Article 4, Meetings, Section 2, Standing Committee Meetings, to reflect this name change. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second. I hear the movement as first Vice Chair Catlin, the second as Treasurer Bouquet. I would now like to turn the floor over to Mr. Jack Kroll, Board Office Executive Manager, for if there is anything you would like to present on this matter.
Thank you, Chair Davidson. I'll just be very brief. I noted in the board report that security is already expressly in the purview of the current committee. And so adding this doesn't necessarily change the scope of the committee, but just provides further emphasis on that element of the committee's duties, that being security. And this was widely supported in a consensus conversation of the Operations and Safety Committee in a previous meeting of that committee in March. And normally we would go through a two-step process to amend the bylaws, whereby we would have a discussion and then an action at a subsequent board meeting. However, this item has been discussed quite a lot by the board already, both at the retreat in February and then again by the committee at its meeting in March. And, you know, the consensus was, this isn't too controversial, so let's just move it forward and get the vote over with. So.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crowley. Appreciate this. I think it's a good name change. I'll go ahead and see if there's any discussion on this matter, or recommended action, I should say. Okay, seeing none. Again, thank you, Mr. Kroll, for the work here, for the help. I will take the vote, and I'll just go ahead and ask, are there any no votes on this action? Okay, seeing none, with 5 aye votes, 0 no votes, and 0 abstentions, the motion will pass. Thank you, directors. Now we'll just go ahead and move on to our April board meeting agenda review. I do see, Mr. Kroll, your hand is raised. Please go ahead, sir.
Yes, I apologize, Chair Davidson. I should have spent a moment recognizing the work of Tai Shrey in the board office. She did a great deal of work to get the bylaw document actually updated into a really more modern format that aligns with our branding, and that document had not been really provided a lot of attention in a long time. And so kudos to Tai Shrey for doing that work. And I'm sorry I didn't mention it earlier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kroll, for mentioning that. And yes, thank you, Ms. Parrish, for the work on that, and for many things to turn our attention to that need some updating. So thank you for doing that and making progress there. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Kroll, and thank you, Ms. Parrish. All right, we'll go ahead and move to the April board meeting agenda review. Is there a motion to move the April board agenda to the board meeting on April 30th?
So moved, Bouquet.
Second, Guzman.
I have the movement as Treasurer Bouquet and the second as Secretary Guzman. Is there any discussion on the board agenda as it is outlined in the board, the executive committee's packet? Mr. Kroll.
I just want to make one quick note. The packet that we produced for the executive committee contained the work plans for the executive, finance, and operations and safety committees. It did not include the performance committee work plan because it had been carried over. This discussion item had been carried over from the March meeting to the April meeting. Unless there's any objections, I'd just like to add the performance committee's work plan into that discussion item as sort of a clerical fix that we didn't include it in this initial packet.
Thank you for highlighting that, Mr. Kroll. Yeah, good note there. I have no concerns adding that, and I'm happy to put forward that we would add that. Is there any discussion or any concerns from other directors regarding that clerical adjustment? All right, seeing none, that sounds great. Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Let's go ahead and add that in. Any other questions or discussion regarding the April agenda? Okay, go ahead and call for the vote. Are there any no votes on this action? Seeing none, with 5 aye votes, 0 no votes, and 0 abstentions, the motion passes. The board agenda will move forward to April 30th. There are 3 discussion items on the agenda. The first is for the draft property and station naming policies. This time I'll hand the floor to Executive Manager Kroll to please present the item. Before you do take the floor, I just want to acknowledge and thank everybody for working together. I'm sure, Mr. Kroll, you'll acknowledge this has been a staff undertaking as well as a board undertaking. I know Director Sloan and Directors Ruscia worked together with Mr. Davies, with Mr. Kroll, and many others on staff that I'm sure we'll hear about more from you, Mr. Kroll, and I just would like to thank everybody for the collaborative effort. So with that being said, Board Office Executive Manager Kroll, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Chair Davidson, and I will spend the next few minutes kind of giving you all an overview of where we're at with this. What I want to specifically discuss and give you a sense of is what the existing policies are with respect to station naming and property naming, detail how this group that you had asked to come together and look into this matter surveyed other agencies and got feedback from the APTA landscape, or rather the transit agency landscape across the country, what we have done so far to develop the proposed ideas that are in front of you all for discussion today, and then actually run through at the end of the presentation what those proposals are and open it up for discussion and feedback and input. I want to emphasize this is by no means the only opportunity to provide input on this. You know, there'll be a number of other avenues. You can always reach out via phone, you can email to get that input in. Director Lewis, who I don't believe has joined us yet, has shared significant input since this item came forward and was on the agenda in March, but tabled to April. And that's just one example of folks reaching out and providing input. So where is the policy now and where did it come from? The board's current policy is actually an amalgamation of 3 prior actions taken in 94, 2003, and 2011. And as we will see later in this meeting in our conversation and discussion around the CAC's charter, the habit has been for the board to take actions to set policy via recommended action, but not to have the document really live anywhere. There isn't a single policy document that we can point to that says this is the RTD Board of Directors policy on station and property naming. Rather, it is the 3 actions that were previously taken, and you have to go back and review those and get a sense of what the policy is in order to chart a path forward here. We, of course, did that. The 3 actions were in 94, 2003, and then 2011. The key takeaways from the 94 and 2003 actions were that geographic location, wayfinding should be the primary factor in setting a station name. And then in 2003, the board expressly stated that they could opt for a different station name and expanded that policy beyond just light rail stops. Finally, that 2003 action also acknowledged that station names should be kept short. You know, again, we've got a lot of signage throughout the system. You don't want to have very long names. You want to make sure that these things fit where they can be easily accessible to the public. In 2011, the board acted again. This was as it was getting closer, as RTD was getting closer to building out some of the final stages of the Fast Tracks project with commuter rail, et cetera. That action set forward the idea that the board and RTD would work with the local communities to set station names 2 years in advance. And we want to emphasize this element here that the committee or the communities in which the stations are located are involved in the naming process. And that's very important for where this conversation will go later. And then it also opened the door, as I mentioned, to corporate sponsorships and outlines that the costs of any changes to station names be borne by the requester. But I think we have to view that element of the policy through the lens that if RTD, say, worked with the city of Lakewood to set the name of a light rail station in that municipality and everyone agreed to it, and then the city came back later and asked to change the name, that would be a conversation around sharing those costs or having the city provide those costs. I don't think that really applies to if you had a group come to you from the outside and request that the name of a station be changed to honor an individual or an event, et cetera. And then flash forward to today in 2024, you all asked, the board asked staff to work with a couple directors earlier this year to bring back some recommendations, and that's where we're at. So we did reach out as part of our initial work to other APTA members. The responses, the substantive responses we got back were from these 4 agencies. Those are LA Metro, WMATA, Corpus Christi, and Houston Metro. The takeaways from our outreach across the APTA landscape is that many agencies just simply do not have a policy for naming properties. If the agencies do have a policy, here are some of the key elements of it. Honorary naming is to be done rarely and only in the most deserving of circumstances. If it is done, it should be done as a secondary name, retaining that wayfinding and geographic proximity elements of the initial name or the official name or the wayfinding name, if you will, as the primary station name. And then, of course, as you move through this process, community engagement is absolutely paramount because these stations are significant parts of the communities in which they are located or significant assets for those communities. You want to make sure that in any station naming process, you've got a lot of community input. Here are a few examples of stations that have been renamed in honor of individuals across the country. It is very rare. This is not an exhaustive list, but this is a list of, rather meticulously researched. We can't say for sure we know all of the stations that have been renamed, but as you can see, it's not very common, especially for regional transit systems such as RTD, to do it. The first 2 examples, Willowbrook Rosa Parks Station in Los Angeles and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Station in Miami, are the only 2 that are strictly for regional transit systems. The other 3 examples listed here are intercity rail facilities in some shape or form. So there are alternatives as we reached out across the APTA landscape and learned from our peers. There are ways to honor significant individuals and parts of the community that want to be recognized or have that energy to recognize a member of their community. Those energies can be channeled towards honorary plaques and displays. The board can always do a proclamation. Many agencies have avoided renaming stations, instead preferring to rename administrative buildings or maintenance facilities. That way they can keep their station names paramount with the idea of wayfinding being central to naming of that station. That isn't to say that you all can't do this. I'm just saying that there are options here. For example, we have already, or you all have already, actually the agency has placed plaques at Civic Center Station honoring the gain of 19 and Wade Blank, for example. So what was our process and progress to date, and what are our next steps and the final goals for the work that we're doing? So as Director Davidson mentioned at the outset here, Director Sloan, Director Rusha, myself, and Government Relations Officer Michael Davies have been the group driving much of this conversation. We've been taking input from staff across the agency, from other directors, from outside entities, as I've highlighted towards the bottom of this slide. We had 3 meetings. One was just to do an initial brainstorm. Another was to review the actual draft policy. And the third was to review and provide feedback on draft procedures for how a name change would occur or an honorary name would be added. And the final thing I'll note here is this was originally slated to come to you all in March, but was tabled to the April meeting due to March's agenda being very full at the executive committee. What we hope to produce and bring back to you all, likely in May, is a document that coalesces RTD's property and station naming policy. As I mentioned earlier, right now this exists only in the form of 3 previous board actions taken. There is not a single policy document, and I think that's important to have as we move forward and really button things down. The second element that we would bring back is a policy and procedures document that outlines the honorary property naming policy and process. So you have your overall broader station naming policy, and then you have a subset of that, which is specific to how you would tackle honorary names. And the third element, as we've done our work here, is offering recommendations for further areas of inquiry for the board. So obviously we did homework, we did research, and we noticed certain things along the way that might give rise or might be sufficient if the board so chooses to look into further. So our next steps, we're going to get the feedback from you all here as well as from the full board at next week's meeting. Depending on the nature and the extent of that feedback, the group that I mentioned previously will meet 1 to 2 additional times. I should note that Director Rusha has noted some concerns with what we have brought forward. I believe she's interested in circulating something to the board prior to next week's meeting. If and when we do receive that document, I'll send it out. So I'm not certain Director Rusha will partake in those additional meetings of the group. If she does wish to partake, we would be more than happy to have her, of course. And then in May, a final policy and procedures document would be presented, or documents would be presented as a recommended action at the executive committee. Should you all approve, that would go to the full board for approval in May. And so all of that has led us to where we are now. Yes, Director Catlin, I see you have a question.
Oh, no, go ahead and finish. I just was hoping that we could get some comments from Director Sloan regarding.
My
You
plan
need
was to wrap up the presentation and then kick it to her and
Thank
to
thank
Director
you.
Sloan and Government Relations Officer Michael Davies to back clean up on all of this.
Thank you.
So we set forward some guiding principles. Again, based off of our research, we really wanted to make sure that anything that we proposed kept wayfinding and navigability of the system as the primary focus of any naming. Honorary naming, therefore, if it were to be approved, would be a secondary name for any property. Again, expanding the universe to not just include stations, but also all properties. I will say specifically, though, this doesn't mean, we exempted, and this was some feedback we got from others. This isn't meant to provide an avenue to say rename a bus stop. That is just not as significant of a thing for the board to necessarily be involved in. I think if there was some appetite for that, that might be a conversation that staff would pick up and set some policies around that. I don't think that rises to the level of the board. And I think I heard we have over 9,000 bus stops, so it's really not a route you all want to go down. I think it would just kind of open a can of worms there. The community engagement, again, is in validation our prerequisite, and that's reflected in the proposals. And it can be for individuals, groups, or events. So I think sometimes we think of individuals as giving cause to or giving rise to the need to rename a station or the call to rename a property. But it could also, in theory, be for groups or individuals that have had significant impacts on transit. And finally, it should be done rarely and only for extraordinary individuals, groups, or events who we can directly tie to having an impact on transit. I think that's key here, is connecting it to transit either at the national level or the local level. And as part of those elements, the current policy proposal is that it could not be in honor of a former RTD director. And if honoring an individual, that individual must be deceased for a minimum of 10 years. So here's the meat of things. The process as we're proposing kind of has 4 key steps. First is to have an application. That application would be submitted through the board office. There would be letters of support from local community leaders, a summary provided by those proposing the honorary name in support effect of why whomever or whatever group they would like to propose an honorary name for is deserving of this honor. And then finally, and this is again relating back to the significance of getting support from the communities in which these stations reside or these properties reside, is that there would need to be a resolution of support from the local city council or board of county commissioners. Second, once a completed application packet was received, the board chair then works with the board office and the GM and CEO to impanel a committee comprised of internal and external experts in a number of different areas, and a group that we think would bring a very diverse voice to the table. Third, once that committee kind of gets together, reviews the application and the supporting materials, they would make a recommendation I think it's important to note that the board may choose to either adopt that recommendation or not. So the committee could propose to go forward with the name change, and the board could reject that. The committee could propose not to move forward with the name change or the honorary name addition rather, and the board could choose to say, thank you for that. We still hold the right to do it, and we believe it deserves this recognition. But in between the committee making their recommendation and the board considering the matter as an action item, staff would take the time to provide input on the cost to do the name change or to add the honorary name, as well as the timeline. You know, there's a lot of signage across the system. These things are not easily updated overnight. And then finally, following that information being available from staff, the two items there from staff would be combined with the committee's recommendation along with the application packet. All of that would be put forward to the board for consideration. And we are proposing, given the weightiness of this, that it would need 2/3 vote to be made official. And I'm just about wrapping up here, where we're specifically looking for feedback, although we're open to any and all of it, is on the composition of the review committee, whether there should be director involvement at that stage of the process, whether to require that higher bar of 2/3 or to simply have a majority vote. And then two other items here is whether to develop a rubric for the committee to use in evaluating proposed honorary names. And lastly, whether the proposed requirements to submit an honorary naming proposal are too burdensome or too easy. And with that concludes my presentation, and I would like to encourage the chair to recognize Director Sloan and/or Government Relations Officer Michael Davies if they had anything further they would like to add.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kroll, and thank you for the hard work on this and putting together a thoughtful approach with the team here and a thoughtful presentation. I'll first turn to Director Sloan.
Great. Wonderful job of putting together all the various ideas that the committee talked about. You know, I think what we have done is reached a policy on an important consideration that, you know, we really, as Jack said, it took him some time to just review to see where the policy on naming RTD property is, and he has done a great job pulling it together there. And so that's the policy for naming. The procedure did take a little bit more discussion because this is an important issue. And, you know, I believe having the outside assistance of a committee of experts would be really helpful in making the name change. So, you know, I am all in favor of having that committee. I would just like to point out just briefly, when I believe it was Arapahoe County named their jail after a hero sheriff that everybody loved. And it turned out he was trading drugs for sex with underage inmates, and they had to change the name of the jail. We don't want to make any kind of mistake, and it's helpful to have a history for the named person and an evaluation of the civil rights aspect. So I think the committee idea is a significant idea. I believe there might be some contention about that. Other than that, I would like to point out two things that came up as something that the board could consider in relationship with this policy. And we're suggesting that it come later, but I think the board should know about both of these because it might be we want to fold everything in at one time. One is probably any group who wants to have an honorary name for RTD property might have public art proposals as well. And I understand getting together public art policy and getting it in conjunction with our current one would take quite a bit of time, but it does seem relevant to the naming process as well. Another suggestion that I think would be fun, but it would be a different discussion, and that would be the temporary naming of RTD property for, you know, and any event that's occurring or an individual. You know, you can think of our sports teams and an individual who would like to be honored for a day or a week or whatever, but that's not in this policy. As is, I am all in favor of going forward, hearing board comments on it, making adjustments, and, you know, actually finalizing a policy. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Sloan. Thank you for the commitment and work on this. We really appreciate that. I know Mr. Kroll referenced Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies, no need to comment unless you'd like to, but I'm happy to open the floor to you next if there's anything you'd like to touch upon.
Thank you, Chair Davidson. No, I don't have any further comments beyond what has been said so far. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for your work, Mr. Davies, on this. I'll go ahead and facilitate questions now as per Mr. Kroll's request on this, or I believe the invitation was also for any other input items as per packet page 69 with those points looking for feedback. So any directors, I'm happy to recognize you if you raise your hand. Secretary Guzman, please.
Hi, y'all. So real quick, just running down the list of looking for feedback. The only question I have about the historians is what makes them recognized? Is it somebody from the university? Just a question about that language to be very clear about who we're asking to join that type of committee. Opinion. I do think the second bullet point to require 2/3 of the body to vote is necessary. I don't think it should be a simple majority. These are serious issues, and to Director Sloan's point, mistakes can be made that we don't want to have to undo because we didn't do our due diligence, and so somebody may have an opinion, and that should be discussed. I think a rubric's probably a really good idea. I don't know what that would look like, so I'd like to see some examples of maybe what could be before weighing in too heavily on that one. And then I don't know that it's too burdensome or too easy. I think you found the via media in between what we're looking for and what's going forward. I will say this, because the body is the ultimate adjudicator of this decision, I do think it would be best if the director stayed out of it and received the recommended action at the end of this process instead of being involved in it during, so we can receive it with an open mind and be more deliberate about the decision that we make as a body. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary. I appreciate all of the feedback there. I know there was an initial question about the historian involvement. Mr. Kroll, is there any feedback you wanted to offer on that?
Yeah, I think that's really a good observation. You know, in my mind, you know, we have a lot of great historical resources available to us being in Denver. You know, you have folks who are professionals over at Colorado History, as well as the Denver Public Library, not to mention, you know, 3 major universities within Denver with significant history departments. And I think maybe spelling out something, including some language that, you know, gave some shape to that without being overly restrictive, you know, and saying prominent historian being, you know, someone who might come from one of those institutions, but maybe not necessarily so. I do want to also mention that I received some feedback from Director Lewis around the historian element. He thought it would be appropriate, and he asked me to share it since he wasn't able to join us this morning. He thought maybe it would be appropriate to only have 1 as opposed to 2.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Other questions and or feedback, particularly on that slide that the secretary went through there from other directors? I do have, oh, great, Mr. Kroll.
I just have some additional feedback from Director Lewis to share whenever is appropriate.
Okay, thank you. I have two questions I'd like to ask, and then I'd be happy to offer my feedback on packet page 69 and the points you're looking for feedback on. The first question I have for anyone that worked on this, Mr. Kroll or Dr. Sloan or Mr. Davies, when you were investigating the policies of other transit agencies, did you come across any, I know you said there was a number that had an absence of any kind of policy. Were there any policies that just completely restrict or prevent any renaming? And if so, would you mind touching on where those were, or what you learned with regards to that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Director Davidson, and I think I had actually included a reference to Houston Metro's policy on this in my initial board discussion item to kind of queue up the idea of even having the group come together and bring forward proposals. Houston Metro actually expressly prohibits the renaming or naming of a station in honor of an individual. I think, and we had some conversations too with Denver city and county folks within their parks department. Obviously, you know, there has been a significant public reckoning with some elements of our history and individuals who have long enjoyed prominent recognition on the names of public facilities, et cetera. And that has proven to, you know, historical hindsight has given a lot of opportunities for communities to revisit the wisdom of those decisions to honor individuals. I believe Director Sloan provided one very notable example. And so I think organizations that do not allow for this type of thing are predominantly concerned about the reputational risk that could could transpire as a result of renaming or naming something after someone who was later deemed to be unworthy. The second element is one, and I think the second concern, and we've heard this throughout, both from staff feedback, from other directors, and from external entities, is once you open the door to naming a property or a place after an individual or group, you can often invite a conversation where you're picking winners and losers. And I think some organizations certainly just want to avoid all of that altogether and just say, hey, we're a transit agency. We're here to focus on transit agency things. That's beyond something that we want to spend our time and energy on.
Thank you for discussing that. I think, you know, definitely what resonates with me is what you just said at the end. I think we just would need to be cognizant when we build the policy itself and what our procedures are when the board takes the vote. And this is going to inform, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, the question as to whether to develop a rubric. I think that would be critical, because I think that even though the board's evaluation is somewhat, or the vote is somewhat discretionary and based on multiple inputs, such as, you know, cost and the inputs that would ultimately come not just from the committee in step 2, but staff recommendations on 3, I think we just need to make sure that whatever we craft, if we proceed with this, is highly objective, so that we have a scoring process and a rubric process, so that that final vote never opens up, you know, what would ultimately be, I would say, you know, qualitative judgments of, as you framed from other, the thought, I think, around Houston, that the idea of picking winners and losers can't really be part of it. So I think it's just a cautionary remark as we do hone in on a policy and a policy recommendation, and why I would say I think a rubric actually has to be essential is because the voting and scoring process for that 2/3 needs to be as absolutely objective as possible. I had another question, but and some feedback, but I'm going to pause because I do see first Vice Chair Catlin. I'm happy to hand the floor to you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. You know, I really think, as you stated, Chair Davidson, that a rubric is really important. Was there any discussion at all about a kind of a pay to play guideline. I'm thinking of like university buildings, Jack, that have been named after people who bequeath a large sum of money. Would we be so fortunate as to have somebody bequeath money? I'm just a little bit concerned about that and how we would address that within the context of the rubric.
Yeah, if
Go
I
ahead.
may, Chair, yeah, thank you.
Please.
I
go ahead.
have a limited answer, and then I think General Counsel Snyder can chime in if I've missed something here. We didn't really consider what if there was an attempt to sort of name a station by bequeathing a gift. What we did consider, and I hit on this a little bit earlier in the presentation, is the part of the policy that, as it currently exists, that would require an outside entity requesting a name change to bear the cost of that. We had some strong concerns in our conversations around the equity of that. You know, some of these individuals who deserve recognition at the level that we would be requiring them to meet as far as being prominent and having contributed significantly is, you know, one that doesn't always overlap with significant financial wherewithal. So that was a significant concern of ours as we went through, and we would recommend that any such honorary naming not have that expectation attached to it that the group would have to come with the money to the table. The other element that I would say is I actually don't think RTD, and this is a legal question for General Counsel Snyder, I don't believe RTD is even eligible to accept gifts like that if one were even to be made, but I might be speaking out of turn here, so. Chair, I would defer to the General Counsel.
Snyder.
Thank you. I just was raising that as, you know, if something were to happen and we were to turn it down on for other reasons, but somebody was saying, well, why would RTD turn something down when there's money attached to it? I just want to make sure that when the rubric is crafted, it takes into account some of those elements. Thank you.
Thank you, First Vice Chair. General Counsel Snyder, is there anything you'd like to weigh in on that matter?
Oh, thank you, Chair. I think the only other thing I would flag is just, you know, we're talking about honorary naming, and, you know, certainly the idea of a revenue generating agreement is kind of in a different bucket and category. And it is something, you know, on a policy level that the board should be considering. You know, what is the, you know, for example, of course, we've had the A-line naming rights was a prior contract that we had with University of Colorado. So that's sort of a different bucket, but definitely something you should be considering in parallel, because we do have that a mechanism to do that.
Thank you, General Counsel. Appreciate it. And I think an important difference between the two here. And thank you, First Vice Chair Catlin, for again highlighting we've just want that rubric, I think, to be very well bounded for what the purpose of the honorary, as General Counsel highlighted. Other questions from directors? Secretary Guzman?
It just occurred to me about impaneling the historians. I don't know why I'm stuck on that part, but anytime you impanel a committee, it's either asked to be volunteer or it's compensated in some way. And so I don't see any mention of that in here. And in terms of getting a fiscal note, which is something I know some directors will be concerned with on this type of policy, that needs to be taken under consideration and explained. How will people's time be compensated, especially if we're going to experts to get help and do research to ensure that we don't run into a problem. So just a thought.
Thank you, Secretary. Am I correct in assuming, Mr. Kroll, that the intent of the review committee is that it would be voluntary for those that are external?
That is correct, Director Davidson, and Director Lewis, that was actually one of the items he had flagged too and had raised a question, and I responded via email to him that at this time we weren't considering any compensation for those outside individuals as being a part of this.
Okay, thank you. The other question that I had was with respect to whether or not the group had considered any limits. In other words, you know, the number of these that may be done over some period of time or in total, you know, to kind of have a long-term view of what the impact may be Were there any discussions on limits from a total quantitative number, whether that's over time or total across the agency?
Director Davidson, I think you've raised a very interesting point, and we did have some brief, sort of conversations around this, but didn't settle on anything. Director Lewis also raised this issue in some of his comments to me. And what I am imagining at this point is we probably need to add something to that before we put it forward to a vote. And one of the things that I have toyed with, and this is not, this is just a brainstorm right here in the meeting, is do you open the application window for a certain amount of time each year, then have that application window closed? Then if you have received applications more than one, the committee would then review all of those and rank them, and you would limit it to, say, 1 or 2 proposals being eligible to move forward each year. And in doing so, you would judge those, and since the rubric idea has a lot of merit and support, you would evaluate those proposals relative to that rubric and score them accordingly. And then you would limit it in that way, because I do think it is a lot. We need to have something in here, if this is something the board wants to support, that does sort of meter that traffic and limit. You don't want to be constantly having to impanel a committee and make these types of decisions. You want to put some framework around it.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kroll, for the comments. I don't think I can offer any cogent ideas right now on scoping that, but I do think that it's worth considering, just with the high level problem being just how to make sure to, as you said, meter and maintain a long-term view of all of this, so we can make sure we're not looking across the whole system every year multiple times. But thank you for those comments. I'll quickly just offer, since you asked on slide 18, packet page 69, I think the composition of the review committee is a good composition. I think, as always, if that kind of composition didn't work, we could revisit it. I think a 2/3 majority is actually very important, and I would agree with that, given that there will potentially be cost impact, especially coming from the staff recommendations. I think the rubric, as I stated, is essential, and actually needs to have some connectivity to how directors evaluate and vote at the end. And then I think the proposed requirements, I think I would agree. I think there's a nice balance here. I'm not sure that it's too easy or too burdensome, although it's a little hard to say without, opening the spigot, so to speak. And so I think that's where perhaps some thought process around, how we might filter the front end of this to ensure that we did get the balance right and are taking a holistic view, thinking about multiple years. And like you said, this is, if we were to entertain this, it would be exceptional. It would be for, very exceptional reasons. So I think, I think the balance is there, but it's also a little hard to know without doing it. So that's my quick 2 cents. And again, thank you for the work. Any further questions from directors? And then also, if not seeing any, Mr. Kroll, let me just start with committee members. Any other questions, comments? Great, Mr. Kroll, you mentioned potentially some additional feedback from Director Lewis in his absence here. I know you shared a little bit of it. Are there additional points you wanted to share with the executive committee?
He actually just had those 3, the number of historians moving from 2 to 1, whether the outside folks would be compensated, and the need to produce some sort of metering so that the number of proposals was controlled in some way.
Great. Okay, well, thank you very much. Director Sloan, Mr. Davies, Mr. Kroll, thanks again for working on this. I think it's great that, when we identify a policy gap and, we're sort of evaluating things in absentia when ideas are thrown out there, it's incumbent on us to take that opportunity and look at how we can make that a policy. So thank you for your work. Thank you to Director Ruscia, who's not here, and for other members of staff who helped support this effort. Thank you. So not seeing any additional conversation, I understand that the action is going to be to continue to refine this and work on this. It is coming forward to the full board. And as I understand it, Mr. Colson, further recommendations will be coming forward for consideration in May. All right, great. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. We'll move to our next discussion item. That is our monthly government relations report. for April 2024. Mr. Michael Davies, our Government Relations Officer, has joined us. Thank you for being here, and I'll turn the floor over to you to present the item.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. Michael Davies, Government Relations Officer. Just have a brief monthly report for you all. At the federal level, Director Tisdale, GM CEO Johnson, and myself had the opportunity to go and participate in the APTA, American Public Transportation Association's 2024 Legislative Conference. It's a great conference to pull together transit agencies from around the country and be able to really be on the forefront of tracking matters, policy matters at the federal level. As a part of that conference, there's really a push to go and visit and meet with your congressional delegation. And the three of us did have the opportunity to go and meet with a number of the offices, specifically Senator Bennett's office, Representative Negus's office, Representative Crow's office, and Representative DeGette's office. One of the primary federal priorities that we talked about was really the East Colfax BRT project that RTD is working on in collaboration with the City and County of Denver, and received a lot of positive comments from our federal delegation on that project and a lot of support surrounding that. So great news on that front. Moving over to the state level, of course, there's a number of bills that we're tracking, number of bills that the board has taken a position on. Starting with Senate Bill 32, that's methods to increase the use of transit, and that really is the bill that funds the Ozone Season Transit Grant Program, or the grant program that funded Zero Fare for Better Air, as well as the new funding stream and grant program for Zero Fare for Youth. That's included in that bill. That bill has passed the Senate. It's been introduced and moved into the House. It's not scheduled in the House yet, but before passing the Senate, we want to make sure you're all aware, and this is, I think, what should be seen as good news. This was a policy proposal that the board supported in previous years, which was regarding the tax credit for employers related to, say, buying an eco-pass for their employees. And the state, for the last 2 years, this is 2023 and 2024 tax years, employers are able to get a refundable tax credit of up to 50%. Senator Hansen had previously supported that tax credit. Senator Hansen came back through an amendment on this bill while on the Senate floor to extend that tax credit through 2028. So now that'll be available for employers to be able to purchase eco passes, or any transit passes for that matter, for their employees. And as I said, that bill's not scheduled yet in the House, but anticipate that to happen soon, as we are running out of days in this legislative session. Moving on to Senate Bill 184, that's the Support Surface Transportation Infrastructure Bill. That is the bill, the board took an amend position on that bill. Largely the concerns surrounding that amend position was to make sure that RTD's funding, and RTD was not the driver of a study and spending RTD tax dollars on a study to study projects outside of the RTD district. And if you recall, this is really the suggestion of the bill sponsors to look at taking Northwest Rail corridor and extending that to Fort Collins. And several amendments were offered by the bill sponsors on behalf of RTD's concerns related to that. So those amendments that were taken out or that were approved was to remove RTD as the agency that would be driving that study, and therefore the costs associated with driving that study on a portion of the project that's outside of the RTD district. So RTD was removed as that entity driving that study. Additionally, the board did raise concerns with recognizing all unfinished fast tracks projects. And so an amendment was made to put in and make sure that unfinished fast tracks projects were recognized in the process of contemplating any any advancement of projects, whether it's Northwest Rail, whether it's Front Range Passenger Rail, and this concept of an intercity project, a kind of a first phase from Denver to Fort Collins. So there was language that was put in there to make sure that all fast tracks projects are equally as important as any other unfinished fast tracks project. And lastly, Director Deschel had raised some concerns with regards to making sure that current RTD service was not sacrificed in any way as a result of work being done by Front Range Passenger Rail, CDOT, and our RTD's collaborative efforts around those projects. So language was also included to state that RTD's current service would not be sacrificed as a result of trying to plan or deliver any of those additional projects. That bill has passed the Senate, it's passed the House Transportation, Housing, and Local Government Committee, and it is currently scheduled for later to the day in the House Finance Committee. So it's moving along. Lastly, with regards to House Bill 1447, this is the transit reform bill. Of course, the RTD board took an opposed position on this. There was a hearing on this bill. Many directors did testify, and the committee did not take any action last week during the hearing. It was stated by bill sponsors that their intent is to remove the board governance portion of that bill. I would anticipate that there will be further work with stakeholders on potential amendments surrounding that bill, as well as the actual amendment to remove the RTD board governance piece of that bill. And that is set for next Tuesday, April 30th. And that's just a simple action only by the committee. So there will not be a testimony process with that as well. It'll simply be action only, but anticipate some additional amendments there. RTD staff has not seen any of those amendments yet. And of course, we'll keep the board up to date as soon as we do, and have a clearer picture on what will be introduced and considered for that bill. And again, that was for next Tuesday, April 30th. That's all I have at the state level. And then just lastly, touching briefly on efforts, of course, at the local level to engage with our local municipalities and elected leaders there. On April 3rd, Board Chair Davidson, GM CEO Johnson were able to present to the Metro Mayor's Caucus. And that was largely around educational efforts and actions that the Revenue Diversification Working Group have been taking. And some good questions from mayors there and good conversation, but good opportunity for mayors to understand RTD's full financial picture. And with that, that concludes my remarks, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davies, for the report, and thank you for your hard work in an extremely busy legislative session. You've been highly communicative, extremely professional, representing the agency beautifully there at the Capitol, and I know it is a lot of work that goes outside of work hours. Thank you for all you've been doing on that. I'll go to discussion and questions from directors on this, starting with Secretary Guzman.
Just a quick question about Senate Bill 32. Is it an either-or situation? I heard that there might have been a language change where we need to choose between either the free month or the year-long youth fair. Are you aware of any such amendment?
Mr. Davies?
Yes, thank you, Secretary Guzman. Yes, there has been some conversations. It's mostly related to how much funding the state has had. If you recall, as previously mentioned to the board, and probably the main reason that this bill has been kind of delayed since it was introduced long ago, and it has been sitting in Senate appropriations for a long time. Most of that was related to the House and Senate just doing their work to figure out the long bill and their appropriations full budget for the year, and then figuring out how much money they have left over to give to all of the bills that are also sitting there in the Appropriations Committee. So With the passage of a long bill and moving forward there, that is what is allowed basically Senate Bill 32 to move forward. It's still not clear to me exactly what that funding level will be, but you are correct. There is conversation within the building of exactly what the final funding level will be, and if it's enough to cover both grants or not. And so I think still some work to be done on that, and we'll definitely keep the board up to date with when I learn more about those potential amendments. But you are correct that there is a notion there that maybe all of the funding that was originally appropriated in the bill might not be there in the end.
Thank you, Mr. Davies, for the answer. Thank you, Secretary, for the question. First Vice Chair Geisinger.
Thank you, Mr. Davies, and I echo the chair's comments. Thanks. I know it's been a lot of work this year. We appreciate it, and you're doing great work. I have two quick questions. Is the source of the funding for HB 32 that they're discussing still the general fund? I've heard various other sources, MMOF and things.
Mr. Davies?
Yes, thank you, Director Geisinger. It was funded out of the general fund as the governor proposed it in his budget, and as contemplated, I think originally it was originally to come out of the general fund there. Again, similar to Secretary Guzman's question, I think there's been conversation of other pots of funding that may be available to also fund that program, knowing that general fund money is very tight in the building. And so I think that's what I'm kind of waiting to learn in this final process here of which pot of funding will that come out of. I think there's been conversation to look at potential excess MMOF money that the state may have to also consider that as a source of funding, which I don't think would be a permanent source of funding, but it may be something they're considering for this year only. But more to learn on that matter, hopefully soon.
Okay, thanks. And I think we've discussed this before, but just in case anything's changed, do we have any data on how well used the tax credit for businesses for EcoPasses is, or if it's brought in new people, anything like that?
Yeah, Director Geisinger, great question. No data that I have been able to gather so far. Really, that would come through the Department of Revenue, and I think they basically only have 1 year. This tax year would have been when it would have been able to cover the 2023 tax year. So I think Department of Revenue is right at that point now of being able to assess that first year of this tax credit. I will certainly follow up with them and see if I can get any of that information, but too early in the two authorized years of the tax credit to, I think, produce that just yet. But is regardless of data available, I will follow up and let you know what I hear from Department of Revenue if they're going to be able to have any of that information.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Thank you, Second Vice Chair Geisinger. Other questions from directors or input? Okay, great. I just would, again, thank you, Mr. Davies, for being here. Yeah, I think we all should stay tuned here. I know quite a bit is coming. We have the action on 1447. And bills, as I understand it, are still continuing to come in right now with a little bit of time left. So just encourage everybody to stay attentive from those directors here to stay attentive to what else may come. Well, thank you for that. We'll go ahead and move to our final discussion item on the agenda. That will be the Citizens Advisory Committee Charter. And I'll hand off to Executive Manager Jack Kroll to present this item.
Great, thank you, Chair Davidson. Just to step back and give you all a little background as to why this item is coming forward. Last fall, or rather last summer, shortly after I started in this position, Chair Geisinger and I began to hear from, who at the time was Chair Geisinger, and I began to hear from the CAC, and they were really hoping to get some further definition and support around their role and the organization. So we met with them in the fall, and then now current chair Davidson, myself, and the GM and CEO Deborah Johnson met with the CAC co-chairs again this spring, and really have brought forward what we believe to be a mutually supported charter for the CAC to define its role, its mission, its composition, and what tasks it's asked to complete. As I mentioned earlier in this meeting with respect to the policies related to station and property naming, the CAC is defined by a series of board actions and not in a specific document. As such, I think there's broad support from both the staff side and from the CAC side to put down in a single document what the CAC's role is. The CAC, for just quick historical purposes, is a creation of the board, and it was created at the time that the board approved the fast tracks, that the board approved the resolution referring to fast tracks ballot initiative to the voters. So the CAC began with a focus on how do I say it? I'm really just providing input on fast tracks. And obviously we are 20 plus years 20 plus years down the road, I should say, on the fast tracks project. And the CAC still provides a lot of value. And this is an attempt to define that role and that value for the CAC, and to agree specifically that we would revisit the role and purpose of the CAC within the next 3 years, having set this idea forward, come back to it on a regular basis. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions or concerns. We would, again, discuss this next week at the board meeting and bring something back in May for action.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Thank you for the work on this. I think another good update as we're revisiting and refreshing some things that needed attention. So thank you for taking that on. Any questions or comments from directors? All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Kroll. We look forward to seeing what comes forward. Again, thank you for the work there. We're going to move into other matters. There are a few things that need to come forward. I just ask everyone to hang on for a little bit. I know sometimes other matters goes quickly, but and we will go pretty efficiently, I believe. But we have one item that Mr. Kroll, I believe you wanted to address, which I'll recognize you first. And I do have some items that I do want to address for committee members, just would ask to hold on here. So Mr. Jack Kroll, I believe you have a topic that you'd like to address in other matters regarding board office records. So I'll go ahead and recognize you first.
Thank you, Chair Davidson, and I'll be brief here. When I started in the position, Tyshree was very quick to flag for me that we have a lot of records going back to the 1970s. Many of these records are stored off-site, and the district is incurring a cost to keep these records available. There is also some, concern around if we ever received a request for records that we have on hand, we would have to produce them, and that would come at a great cost of staff time, etc. So the reality is, while the board office is the official repository for the board's actions, after a certain point in time in history, the board office is not nearly as well equipped as, say, the Colorado State Archives or the Denver Public Library is at maintaining public accessibility to these records. And so we engaged in a conversation with the Colorado State Archives, and they are interested in taking some of the board office's records and putting those into their files and records. I do believe that where we're headed with this is that we would ultimately, get rid of some records, but I'm not talking official meeting minutes. I'm not talking, official record of board actions. I'm talking things like individual director expense reports and individual notes and compositions from directors and memos and things like that. There really isn't at a certain point a whole lot of value in maintaining those. And given that the state archives and other entities are better equipped anyways to catalog and provide access to those items. So before any final decisions are made, we will of course update this group, but I did want you all to be aware of it. This is happening in conjunction with a broader effort at RTD to better get hands around records and have a retention schedule that's kept to. And so we are just doing our part as well in all of this to align with efforts that are going on elsewhere within the agency with respect to record keeping.
Thank you very much for highlighting that, Mr. Kroll. That all makes sense. That's a lot of records, I know. Are there any comments from directors regarding that? Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for taking that on. And Ms. Parrish, thank you for highlighting the challenges there as well. I do have just 3 quick things I want to touch on here in other matters, and I'll take them one at a time here. The first is with respect to something that came up at the last executive committee briefly. First Vice Chair Catlin had raised the topic of our agency response system, which our entire board office, Marie, Jillian, Taishrei, Jack have done tremendous work working together with staff elsewhere within the agency to develop our agency response system and refine the way in which we receive information requests and requests for assistance from directors, and how those get organized and how we measure those requests as well. So not only how they're responded to and how they're organized, but also having good understanding of staff time being spent on particular issues. So thank you to everybody for the work on that. When First Vice Chair Catlin had raised this issue last month, I think some of what we were discussing was that we might use this as an opportunity to put forward or consider some guidelines for how the board communicates with staff. The best way for us to maximize the use of a system like this and use it to our advantage, our collective RTD advantage of organizing our communications, prioritizing our communications, centralizing our responses in a way that everyone can have access to. I think it's incumbent upon us to consider how we communicate with staff and what types of communications occur and what we funnel through the agency response system. So since that time, I've had some chance to interface with First Vice Chair Catlin, and I see your hand is raised to consider how we might approach this and how we might partner with the board office to maximize the use of the agency response system, and also leverage this as an opportunity to reduce burden that comes to staff in the form of disparate communications that may be text messages and phone calls and emails, kind of figuring out how we can formalize a lot of this to reduce burden and also maximize the use of the system. So I remain committed to working on that. I know First Vice Chair Catlin, you've had a lot of thoughts about that, and I see your hands are up. I expect this, I just wanted to highlight this and expect to be bringing forward some ideas in the forthcoming weeks. So I'll hand off to you, First Vice Chair Catlin. I thank you for raising this last month. I'll hand the floor off to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I agree that we need to continue to work on that, and I appreciate you bringing it up again, just to alert this group that we haven't dropped the ball in spite of it being a very busy month. We do want to continue working with the board office so that we can, as you said, ease the burden on staff and streamline our process and make it much more businesslike and efficient. And also so that we're transparent and other directors know exactly what is being requested by their fellow board members. So thank you for that, and we will continue to work on it and bring this forward in subsequent meetings. I appreciate it.
Thank you, First Vice Chair Catlin. I appreciate that. I think what I'll just conclude with there is just an open invitation for directors to provide any information to First Vice Chair Catlin or to myself regarding the what we might do. I see, for the sake of the record, we are joined by Director Tisdale. Thank you for joining us, sir. You've joined us during other matters. So I'll leave that one there, and just please reach out to me with any input that the committee may have as we consider that. The next matter I wanted to address is with respect to Tabor. As was alluded to by Mr. Davies, I've had the opportunity to participate in several presentations. I know many directors have as well. Certainly we had the town hall organized by Secretary Guzman, the board office, and many directors participated in that. I know Director Geisinger, you've spoken at some events. I've recently spoken at Dr. Cogg's board meeting, the Metro mayors, the Metro County commissioners, and city councils as well. And I'm encouraged by how the conversations around our financial position and what we face with respect to the exemption, or I'm sorry, the loss of the exemption of our Tabor exemption coming up. I think there's been a fairly warm welcome and consensus that the region needs to work together with RTD to ensure that we're maximizing the resources we have for transit wherever possible. I did just want to highlight for directors, we are very close to having the results from our polling. The preliminary results do sound very encouraging. I think Director Tisdale's joined us at a great time because I would like to reach out. I will be conferring offline with Committee Chair Tisdale, and we'll also reach out with Vice Committee Chair Guzman of Finance and Planning to schedule some analysis and review of the polling so that we can expeditiously identify the opportunities for us to look at our polling results. The board can expect to see a forthcoming memo coming from me highlighting some preliminary findings. I do think we're going to be looking at some encouraging information. And what I would say is just, an open call to directors right now to dialogue with all stakeholders and public you interact with, to continue to highlight the issue that RTD is facing the loss of its Tabor exemption on half its revenues at the end of this year, and that this board will be contemplating what to do about that. So I just wanted to highlight that for everyone to be aware of that. I don't think there's a whole lot to say about it other than a lot of information coming. Please pay attention to email memos, and there's going to be some other matters discussions, and then hopefully some committee discussions next month. Are there any questions about that, or do any other directors want to weigh in? I'd be remiss in not thanking Second Vice Chair Geisinger for her work in considering how to proceed with this matter. Happy to open the floor if you'd like. No need to say anything if you don't. Second Vice Chair Geisinger, please go ahead.
Just super fast. I think one thing that Director Sloan and I have talked about is putting together a memo that we'll be sending out, I think, asking all the directors to start thinking through groups that you would reach out to educate them on our issue. I know some of you are doing that, but maybe try to get that in a little more formalized way. Thanks.
Thank you, Second Vice Chair. Appreciate that. Any other comments, questions? Great. Chair Tisdale, I'll be reaching out to you soon. And again, be remiss in not thanking Mr. Davies and General Counsel Snyder. Thank you for your continued work on the polling matters and this topic as well. I think good news is coming. The last other matter that I had that I wanted to bring before the board is with respect to our meetings. We passed a bylaw, and we made it a bylaw amendment and change to have our 4-hour meeting length. I think there's an opportunity right now to leverage that bylaw change to look at also how we conduct our business in meetings. I think the time may be now for us to take a look at rules of procedure as just one example, and that we might consider formalizing some ways that we approach public comment, how we approach questions for staff that inform policy decisions, how we approach discussion among directors. All that to say, I just wanted to flag that I think this is an important time for us to consider with our bylaw change and with how we do business. And while as Mr. Kroll has joined us at the board office, I think the board office has been doing great work together to look at things that need to be updated or gaps that we have, like the station naming policy we heard more about. I think there are some gaps and an opportunity to visit how we conduct our meetings. So I'll be touching on that a little bit more. You can expect to hear more from me on that at the upcoming board meeting in other matters. So simply just wanted to highlight that for the group here. The goal is to streamline and make efficient our board meetings for the purposes of streamlining our decisions on policy matters, and again, minimizing where possible burden to staff on fielding questions and prioritizing what will best inform policy decisions. So not much more to say on that unless anyone has any input that I'm happy to take at this time. All right, great. With that, that's the last of the other matters I had. Thanks for your patience with me bringing 3 this afternoon. Are there any other matters that other directors would like to bring before the committee? Yes, Director Tisdale, please.
Thank you very much. I apologize. I couldn't be on the executive committee meeting because I was chairing the transit board members board talk live session we had for APTA. And I'm going to see to it that we get the materials from that to everybody, because it was on CEO evaluations and it gave us a study of what AC Transit did out in Oakland in hiring a third-party facilitator for purposes of conducting their general manager, CEO performance evaluation. I thought it was very useful information, so I just wanted to share that. Secondly, I know this has probably already been addressed, and I apologize for being the late interloper, but I was wondering, has the amended bill been dropped, amended 1447 in the legislature?
No, thank you, Director Tisdale. We did hear from Mr. Davies in his government relations report. It has not. There are amendments being considered. Mr. Davies did highlight for the committee that it is scheduled for action only with no testimony next Tuesday, April 30th, the day of our board meeting, but we do not have draft amendments at this time. All we have are things that are circulating that are still in rumor and discussion with respect to what may or may not happen with a study of governance. We do expect the amendment to there to be amendments to take out the governance provisions, just as the bill sponsors had highlighted last week. Still somewhat to be determined what the final nature of those amendments will look like. Mr. Davies, if there's anything I missed from your report, happy to open the floor to you.
Thank you, Chair. No, I think that covers it.
Thank you. And thank you, Director Tisdale. Okay, seeing no other discussion, we will adjourn the meeting as of 1:25 p.m. April 25th. I thank you all. Just as a reminder, the next executive committee, is scheduled for Thursday, May 23rd. The committee's work plan calls for a discussion on the 2-year committee appointments as well as potential bylaw changes regarding committee appointments. We are also likely to have actions to take on the CAC charter and our station naming policies. And there may also be some additional pieces that will be coming with respect to Tabor. So stay tuned. Finally, so that we remained aligned with our board approved GM CEO compensation philosophy, the May Executive Committee may include an executive session that would have a conversation with our general manager and CEO. So we have a number of things coming. Stay tuned. I think May will be a busy executive session. Make sure to please flag that on your calendar, have that available for some robust discussion. And with that, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for the patience. Have a wonderful